One. Shalom and welcome to another edition of Parsha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamet in Highland Park, New Jersey, the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation on Shemet. Joining me, my good friends, Rabbi Barry Chesler, Solomon Shayla Day School of Long Island, Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanovsky on Sheikh Chesed, New York City. We're recording this on day 270 of the war. Already it's 270. And obviously thinking of the hostages, thinking of all those people who are enduring this unspeakable trauma in their lives, and studying on their behalf and thinking of them and offering our prayers that they return home as soon as possible, and that God be with them during this difficult time. We are talking about Parashat Korah this week. I want to say it's a difficult parsha. It's difficult to enter into this parsha. So let's just recap for a second and just tell our listeners at Machane Ramah and throughout the world, where are we in the desert right now? And this
And the
moment.
answer is not. And the answer is not over by a big rock.
Where are
that's that Hukat.
the people? Okay, so I'll start with, we've just had this experience with the 12 scouts and the sentence that has been issued over the people, which is that they're going to die in the desert, and they're going to spend another 38 years wandering in the desert. And at the end of last week's parsha, we have this little, the paragraph about tzitzit. And
So, do you think that paragraph is inserted where it is to give some comfort to the people? That they won't be wandering as long as they keep their head straight, so to speak?
You shall not wander after your hearts and your eyes.
Right, so as long as they stay on the right path, they'll be okay.
So I want to, this is last week's parsha, but I want to make a point about the placement of the tzitzit mitzvot, which obviously at some level, the parshiot that we have them, as we have them, are, historical accidents. Like the Torah doesn't divide them into parshiot. And in fact, the ancient Eretz Yisraeli reading system was different than the Babylonian reading system. But I want to say that the tzitzit passage and the Petil Techelet represent an extremely fitting end to the spies narrative, because latur et haaretz,
yes,
is what the spies have to do, and it bears, they bear zenutechem, they bear your faithlessness. And so now this passage comes up and says, lo tatur acharei levavchem v'acharei nechem, don't stray after your eyes and hearts, asher atem zonim, which you are faithless about. So the tzitzit passage, to me, I'll throw one more thing in there, because the spies basically said, we're too weak to do this. And the Petil Techelet, the little bit of royal blue, says, you are up to it. You can do this. You can have some royalty in there. I do think is a very fitting end, not necessarily to ease their pain, although it may be that too, but is to give them this exhortation, vote of confidence. Yes, you can. Now, Korah comes immediately thereafter, and it's, in a sense, the inversion of the spies failing. The spies failing was, they said, lo nuchala, we just ki chazak hu mimenu, those Canaanites are just way too strong for us. No, you have the tzitzit, there's a vote of confidence, but then Korah comes along and says, by the way, speaking of confidence, I'm extremely confident. I am really the boss here, and I should really be in the position of leadership.
So let me ask you to be clear and to clarify, what does he want? What does he want? And what is he complaining about? And why is this the moment, or is there any moment that is the best moment to foment a rebellion? Barry.
So I think it's easier to identify what he's complaining about than it is to identify what he wants. And the reason for that is that what he's complaining about, I think, is easy for everyone to see. You have two men who happen to be brothers. Aaron, the older brother, has the priesthood reserved for him, continuing an ancient tradition, but now with a twist, because from now on, only Aaron's children and descendants will be priests, and not what had been before the firstborn. And we have Moshe, who is the recipient of revelation, and they run the show. They are the masters of communication with the divine, and they're instructing on God's behalf the people. Korah is from the same family. He's a Levite, same tribe, and he feels himself disenfranchised. He
He's Moses'
says,
first cousin.
he says, you have too much power. Why don't we have more power? Because after all, everyone is holy. We're supposed to be a goy kadosh, not a mishpacha kadosha.
Does he want power, or does he want the
So
connection to
I think
God? Does he
that
want, the
I'm of two minds. I think it may just be a simple power play, or it may be that he wants to attack Aaron and Moses. I often think about this great story in Kings with Solomon and the two prostitutes, where the prostitute whose son dies, it becomes clear as the story progresses that her main goal is to have the other woman feel like she feels, bereft of a son, rather than to actually have a son. And I wonder if Korach would like Moses and Aaron to feel pain rather than something positive for himself.
I think the question about what Korach wants is very hard to ascertain, um, because the rhetoric, there is something about his rhetoric that ought to be appealing, right? That you can imagine any society, including one led by Moshe Rabbeinu, Aharon HaKohen, that gets too hierarchical, and that people don't share, and that certain people do feel marginalized. This is the conversation we're having in the United States, right? About elites in the blue state, coastal states and whatever, and the people in the American center or whatever. Korach stands up and says, this society is overly hierarchical. Madua titnasu al kahal Adonai. Why? Who put you? Why do you flaunt your own authority over this divine, God's people? And by the way, it's not just Korach. There's the Reubenite associates, Datan and Aviram. They are the descendants of the firstborn tribe, which has been somewhat marginalized. But there's also 250 other chieftains. So like you think that they're sort of like lower tier aristocracy, whatever. These are dukes and baronets or whatever that is. Not that I know anything about the British aristocracy. And they want to know, how come you guys are being mitnasim? You're flaunting yourself. And that rhetoric is at least partly appealing, but one cannot escape feeling that Korach is, in this demagogic way, applying reasonable claims for a more just and equitable society, really in advance of gaining power himself.
So we can't escape the politics here, that this is really a political story, and that our societies, our democracies have these mechanisms where we make transitions from one leader to another. In this republic in the United States, that happens through elections. You elect a president every 4 years. In parliamentary democracies, that happens in a different way, where governments have confidence or have no confidence, and what happens also is that when a leader, when the rank and file of a party wants to unseat the leader, there's a conversation, there's a rebellion going on. This past week in Canada, there was a by-election. So by-election, one riding, one district, had an election, and the liberals lost. The liberals are the party in power, and that's a signal. That was a signal. And so the people are in the Liberal Party saying, maybe we need to switch our leader. Maybe we need to. So there's a moment where, there is a natural kind of question of, do we have confidence in our leader? And that happens. It's happening in the United States. It's happening in Canada. It's happening in England. It's happening in Israel. It's happening everywhere.
France, don't forget France. France is
And
having
France, exactly.
disasters.
So it's part of it's there is a natural process where a rank and file says, we think we have a problem. We think that we do not have confidence in our leader. So we have a mechanism so that we can recall the leader, or we can have a convention and put the question of leadership to a vote. And then if the party says we have no confidence in the leader, we'll go to a leadership convention and elect a new leader. And
This is, by the way, a really important thing, because listen, we read the Torah. We know that Moshe Rabbeinu is Moshe Rabbeinu. We know what's going to come later in the Parsha, that the earth is going to open up its mouth and swallow Korach and his followers whole at the direction of God. So we know who God wants to be the leader. But in general, it's a very valuable thing for a political, society, and all societies, of course, are political, for people to be able to say, let's reevaluate who's in charge. Because if you don't have that, then you have, Idi Amin, president for life.
so maybe my question
There's
here,
another piece that we have to take into mind.
just before you, my question here is this a healthy process, or is this? I mean, we know how the story ends.
Okay. So I think that it can be healthy, but it doesn't have to be healthy. So you take your by-election, and one way to look at it is you want to throw the bums out. You don't like the party in power, so you're going to vote for the other person. But the real question that has to be asked, it would seem to me, is who is actually the best person to govern for the next period of time?
Okay.
And it may be that the person that you dislike actually is still the better person to govern than the person you're going to vote in. And it depends on how you frame the question, what you think is more important. Is it more important to get rid of the person in power? Or is it more important to actually find the best person to lead? And, like much of life, there are no easy answers there.
So let me ask it in this way, which is Korach doing a service here so that the question could be put on the table and answered affirmatively as a vote of confidence for Moses from God, and by extension the people? Is he doing us a favor, or is he simply committing an act of rebellion?
So I think that the way the story is described, he is rebelling because he does this in public.
Yeah.
And the only reason to do it in public is to attack. If he was interested in solving a problem, you would do it in private. You say, look, Moses, it seems to me that you have an awful lot of power. Maybe it would be better to spread some around. You remember Jethro suggested you needed helpers.
Yeah.
I'm here. But once he does it in public, I don't see how it could be.
So in other words,
servant.
the fact that he does it as a demonstration and is really, I mean, he's got his 250 people around him, which means he had to have done some groundwork. He had to build his party, right? And he builds his party as a base, and he's coming to Moses with a base of 250 people, plus or minus a couple of other people from other tribes, and he's really making a political move here, right?
I would say, by the way, our listeners might also want to know this, and I'm sure you have heard, faithful listeners out there, that there's, something called the documentary hypothesis, and that the Torah, as we have received it, is not identical with what Moses brought down from Mount Sinai, but it's a stitch together of different source materials, oral sources, and different whole compositions and different pieces of fragments and stuff. And this chapter, number 16, is one of the evidences where you can, if you look closely, you can see the seams by which the text is stitched together, because there's two rebellions here. There's Korach and his fellow Levites. So, for example, um, the Korach and his people make their claim, and they say Rav. They say what do they say? Rav lachem ki kolei dakdoshim. Rav lachem, you guys are taking too much. And Moses responds, Rav lachem b'nei Levi. You Levites have gone. You're the ones who have gone too far. And then Moses responds to them in verse. Then he makes his own speech in verse 8. Shimuna b'nei Levi. Hear me, O Levites. You have your own role in the tabernacle. The Kohanim have their role. The Levites have their role. Be happy, Yismach Moshe b'matnat chelko. And you are rebelling against the Lord. Now, in verse 12, Vayishlach Moshe likro Datan ve'Aviram b'nei Eliyav. And then Moses calls out to Datan and Aviram, son of Eliyav. They are the Reubenite tribe, as we said earlier. Reuben is the physical firstborn, and yet they've been marginalized. And they say, Lo na'aleh, we're not coming up. Who made you the boss? If you wanted to say that somebody was really making the no confidence, the public faith, the best intentioned public approach to a no confidence measure to try and make things better, Datan and Aviram maybe in verses 13 to 14 have you could find it there if you were looking for it. This is because, listen, is it not enough you brought us out of a land flowing with milk and honey? Okay, obviously they've got their heads screwed on wrong if they look back at Egypt as the land flowing with milk and honey, but at least it was a rich land with reliable rivers and lots of agricultural produce. You brought out of that relative wealth. Lahamitenu b'midbar, you're going to kill us in the desert. Ki tistarer aleinu gam histarer. Just so you could lord it over us. And even if you had brought us into a land flowing with milk and honey, which you have not, are you going to be a bully? You're going to gouge out people's eyes, which idiomatically would say, you're just going to be a total dictator. Datan Aviram, I'm not on their team. I'm on Moshe Rabbeinu's team. But if you wanted to say that they were simply pointing out the failure of Moses' leadership, they're sitting in the desert and they're starving to death and they got no water and it's not so easy. Right. And maybe it's time for new elections.
They have a
But
point.
when they say Lo na'aleh, what they're doing is invoking the previous story about the spies.
Yeah.
Because that's what the 10 spies said too. We're not going up. We are incapable of conquering this land. And I think that's why Datan and Aviram want to go back, because they are incapable of going forward in any way, whether it's directionally towards Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, or whether it's to Moses' tent. And, you dress them up very nicely, Jeremy, and I think that's a nice thing. But I find them to be kind of insidious as well.
Can we talk for a minute about Moses' reaction, both to Korach and also to Datan Aviram? And in the reaction to Korach, it says, Vayishma Moshe vayipol apanav. Moses hears and he falls on his face. That's that reaction. And that falling on the face could be exasperation. It could be, I need to talk to God. It could be a lot of different things. And then when Datan and Aviram speak and say, Lo na'aleh, we're not going to come out with you. Vayichar Moshe Moed. Moses actually is very angry. Vayichar Moshe Moed. Vayomer el Adonai. He says to God, Al tefen al minchatam. Do not have any regard to their gift, their oblation.
Oblation. Thanks
oblation.
to GPS.
Oblation.
Oblation. I
have not taken the ass of any one of them, nor have I wronged any one of them. In other words, what? Like he's exasperated. He's really angry.
Well, yes, he's absolutely exasperated and angry. And what's his piece of evidence? I am not corrupt. Because, what do corrupt leaders do? They enrich themselves at their population's expense. I did not steal one donkey from them. That's what Shmuel will say later. I have not, you think that I'm getting rich off of this job? I'm not getting rich off of this job.
So there's tremendous frustration here on Moses's part. And it's all personal now. It's all gotten to be personal. And he's taking it personally. And then you have God's reaction, which is what does God want us to do to them? The whole people are ganging up. It's a moment of crisis, and God says in verse 20, "Vaydaber Adonai el Moshe ve'Aaron lemor, hibadlu mitoch ha'ida." Get out of the community. Stand back from this community that I may annihilate them in an instant. And then Moses and Aaron, they fall on their faces again, vayiplu al pneihem, and they say, O God, source of the breath of all flesh, when one man sins, will you be wrathful with the whole community? This is why the story is so difficult, because you feel the frustration of Moses, and you feel God's frustration with the people, and then Moses and Aaron are going to beseech God and say, let up, wait, don't destroy them.
This is why the book of Numbers, you know, is so you totally get the bleakness of 40 years in the desert, because every time you turn around, there's some crisis about the water and the food. There's some crisis of leadership. There's some, people lose the thread on the mission of coming to Eretz Yisrael. And you totally, like the book on a literary level does, in the relentlessness of the rottenness, and Moses is tired of the people, and the people are tired of Moses, and God's tired of them all. The book really on a literary level conveys the fatigue and the frustration.
Mess. The whole thing is a mess. And so he convinces God to relent, which is, I guess, another great moment where this intercession of a human being to God can avert this decree of annihilation. Okay, so then what? So withdraw from the abodes of Korach, Datan, and Aviram, God says. Moses rose and went to Datan and Aviram, the elders of Israel following him. He addressed the community saying, move away from the tents of these wicked men and touch nothing that belongs to them, lest you be wiped out for all their sins. So they withdrew. And fast forward, he warns them of what's going to happen. Scarcely had he finished speaking all these words, I'm in verse 31, when the ground under them burst asunder, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up in their households. And all Korach's people and their possessions, they went down alive into Sheol, with all that belonged to them. The earth closed over them, and they vanished from the midst of the congregation. All Israel around them fled at their shrieks, for they said, the earth might swallow us. And a fire went forth from the Lord and consumed the 250 men offering incense. And the moral of the story is, I guess you just don't mess with God. You just don't mess with Moses. And or what is the moral of the story here? What do you conclude? This is, I mean, it's great. It's a great cinematic moment. It's, I after the couple of weeks ago we talked about the Ark, so I played Raiders of the Lost Ark, the great scene, the climactic scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark, classic movie, right? And they bring out the Ark, and they're doing this ceremony, and they open the Ark, and there's this, great Spielberg tension, and then all of a sudden, everything happens, and the guy's face melts, and people go on fire, and it's a biblical moment, right? Spielberg succeeds in capturing the ferocity of the Bible, the ferocity of this moment.
So
Here we have this
the
ferocity.
the curious thing here is why the Bible emphasizes that they go down alive to Sheol. What is that supposed to mean to us?
They don't have a death, but they do die. They're kind of mostly dead.
Mostly dead, because they got to write some Tehillim.
They're mostly
So,
dead.
okay. Well, those are the boys. But the thing that strikes me, we were talking before that the story reminds me, at least, of the story of Nadav and Avihu. And here at the end, most especially so, because how did Nadav and Avihu die? The fire went forth from the Lord. And it's that same fire that will consume Korach and his followers. And I think that what struck me when you were narrating the story is that the reason why the Israelites are so fearful is because they think they're going to be swallowed up. So they have to decide in that moment, whose side are they on? Either they're with Korah in Sheol, or they're with Moses and Aaron. And
Not
they have one moment to decide that.
surprising.
And the way the story is told, of course, it's a no-brainer. So they opt for being with Moses. And sometimes, you have to make those quick decisions, even though your heart may be in one place, your head has to be somewhere else.
I just what is a tiny observation, which I just, thanks to the wonders of our computers here, the phrase Mishkan Korach, the Korach's tent, in the Torah, there's a couple of other places where Mishkan refers to just somebody's personal dwelling. Most famously in Bilam's prophecy, Matovu ohalecha Yaakov mishkenotecha Yisrael. And there's a couple of other places where it's just your tent, not in the Torah, in the Nevi'im. But this is the only place in the Torah where a Mishkan is not God's house, but it's Korach's house, Mishkan Korach. And I think that at least I'm going to float that if you want to look for those pieces of evidence that Korach himself is like raising himself up to be, unjustly the holy guy, the guy who wants to be in charge, and even idolatrously taking the place of Moshe and his relationship with God and even God, the fact that it says Mishkan Korach just rings in your ear. No. Mishkan Hashem, that's the Mishkan that we care about. And he's fleeing Mishkan Korach. I hear the poetic resonance in that.
So just to add to that, I think the moral, when I say Elliot, is Korach is saying, I need to go up in stature, and God says, I will take you down.
I'll take you down.
And with that also, Madua, he asks at the beginning of the confrontation of Moses, Madua titnasu, why do you raise yourself up? And this is like midah keneged midah, measure for measure. You get what's coming to you. You want to go up, you're going down.
Wow. There's just so much here, and I want to express the pain of it and enjoy it so much. Enjoy the pain of this story so much because there are a lot of truths here in this story. There's a truth about leadership. There's a truth about longevity in leadership. There's a truth about challenges to leadership. There is a truth about even the rabbinic truth about it, and this may be a good way to conclude because that lovely line in Pirkei Avot, Kol machloket she l'shem shemayim sofa li'yitkayem, machloket she'ena l'shem shemayim eina sofa li'yitkayem, which means all disputes that are for the sake of heaven, they will have some kind of permanence to them. And those disputes that are not for the sake of heaven will not have any permanent conclusion or any permanent ramifications. And which is a debate for the sake of heaven is Hillel and Shammai. B'she'ena l'shem shamayim zo machloket Korach v'chol adato. This is the dispute of Korach and his cohort. And the rabbis see in Korach that he is very self-serving, that there is a sense that it is not for the sake of heaven. And he ends up in Sheol, I guess, which is the opposite.
But they're also in the Mishnah that you mentioned, Elliot, a kind of rabbinic triumphalism as well, because the rabbinic dispute is the one that endures. The biblical dispute, not so important. But I want to come back to something that you said earlier, that earlier you were talking about how Moses said, what do you want from me? I never took a donkey.
Right.
And the question is, who actually knew that? It appears from the words of the Torah that the only one who knew that was Moses, that he may have been ethically and morally pure, but that escaped the notice of the people. and therefore he could be challenged and compared to any other leader, because integrity is not just the way that you are, but it has to be the way that you portray yourself as well. And if people don't get that you have integrity, the integrity doesn't last either.
So we're out of time, but is there a critique of Moses here? Can we offer a gentle criticism of Moses in terms of, what he could have done and better in order to avoid this insurrection? Could he have a better press agent? Could he have had a better PR, better publicity, better, you know, could he have
Well,
reached the
I'll tell you one
people?
thing. One thing you don't want to do is you don't want to have a debate months before the election. You got to make sure that that the Korach's mic is muted so he doesn't interrupt. But you got to remember your ancestors. You got to remember your answers, because Moses, let's just remember, he's 80 plus years old. Like, you know.
Are you going to go there? You're going to go. You're going to. No,
So the parsha goes on, right? And after there's another instantiation after the Korach rebellion and the Datan v'Abiram rebellion. There's another instantiation that Aaron is the appropriate ritual leader. There's this scene where every tribe has to put out these wooden staffs, and Aaron's staff overnight sprouts almond blossoms. Then there's some mitzvot that attach to the priestly tithes. The priests, because they have this really hard job, the people the people get to see that working in the temple is really dangerous, because God's presence is there and people get zapped, and the risk of tum'ah, the risk of defilement is really bad, and the punishment for defilement is really bad. And so as a result, you guys are the nuclear waste management guys. And so you get tithes, and you get to eat the chatat sacrifices, and there's some perks that come with this job. Not perks like I steal your donkey, but perks like you get paid, and the priests don't have land, but they do have tithes, and they do have the shokat truma, and the chazat sufa and the shokat truma. Of every sacrifice they get certain parts of the animals. And so I do think that the overall thrust of the parsha is the rebels were just wrong. Moshe and Aaron were just right. God has chosen them. It's really clear. But I do think that just as Moshe listened to Yitro and decentralized power, I mean, it was still hierarchical, but it was spread through society. I like the fact that I think that it is in generally speaking, to a society's peril if they can't listen, even the bad intention guys, if they can't listen to a critique. In the 19th century Polish Hasidism, the Kutzka Rebbe, very important figure who was himself a snarky rebel in his own way, he called Korach our holy grandfather. And what I think he meant by that was not that really Korach should have won the rebellion and Moshe should have stepped aside. That's obviously not what's going on in the story, but that societies ought to be able to hear from the gadflies, from the thorns in the side, from the people willing to question authority and question all the obvious things, like that all the people really are holy, even if not all the people are Kohanim.
So he had a point, and we thank him for that. We give him a validation, except he's still in Sheol. He didn't it was more self-centered than
No, he shouldn't have won.
he
He
should
shouldn't
have.
have won.
He should
But it
have.
wasn't bad that he got to say what he said. That we, by the way, you want to? I mean, now I'll not talk about the documentary hypothesis. Now I'll talk about a faithful traditional thing of the Torah. Say, God decided it was good enough to include Korach's words in the Torah.
Well, there's
So
something to be said
you
for
might
that.
have been bad, but that's not bad.
Okay, so then we have to learn from this, and that
Well, and what we need to learn, I think, and what Moses needs to learn, is that a good leader is sensitive to the needs of the community and does not necessarily fault them for the way they express themselves, but tries to address the deeper point.
Nice. That's a good place to end the conversation. I want to thank everyone for listening, for watching. Special shout out to our friends at Machane Ramah Berkshires, and thanks to Mitch Mernick and the whole Kol Ramah 102.3 for putting us on. And we're on the PA system there, and I know that we single in one shot we quadruple our listenership. Right
I will be there, not this upcoming Shabbos, not of Korah, but of Chukat. I will be on the Shabbos at Machane Ramah Berkshires, and I will walk past the Agam listening for us on Friday.
Absolutely. Next week I'm going to Israel, so we'll talk about it.
Nisya Tova.
Exactly.
Tova.
In the meantime, everyone, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
We'll see you next week on the next edition of Parsha Talk. Shabbat Shalom.